This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hi, and welcome back to the Week in Sustainability. I'm Hannah Osofsky, a sustainability data analyst on our sustainability team. I'm joined today by Mitch Voss, our director of sustainability. And we're going to be diving into the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive out of the European Union. We'll break down its recent delay and then dive into some implications for organizations outside of the EU and in the EU as well. If you haven't joined us in our coverage of CSRD before, it's important to highlight that this is a big deal. It builds upon an existing directive, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, or NFRD. It applies to way more companies than the NFRD ever did and has way more extensive requirements. So the CSRD is part of this much larger effort on the EU, in the EU to direct investment towards sustainable projects and support an EU Green New Deal. The CSRD was originally adopted in November of 2022, and large public companies and large private companies were slated to face their first reporting deadlines in 2024. Now the European Parliament has approved a 2-year delay for companies that are not based in the EU and for sector-specific reporting requirements. So now those companies that were expecting a 2024 deadline now have until 2026. And Mitch, I just want to know your first reactions to this news.
Yeah. First and foremost, I think it just highlights the complexity of reporting right now. That with the lack of standardization, very clear and direct guidelines for various sectors, for various specific types of organizations, there's a lot of uncertainty. Whether that be in for example, how to do the calculations, how to represent that in terms of your organization, in terms of risk in representing things that could be construed as not the full truth for your organization. It certainly makes it challenging to be able to standardize around some of this and make these types of regulations a reality. I think with EFRAG delaying the sector specific standards to focus on the ESRS report effective January 1st, it again highlights that kind of discrepancy or the challenges of both public, non-public companies, as well as the stakeholders and their expectations around reporting in terms of what needs to be shared and what full transparency actually looks like. Another thing I think with companies, especially outside of the EU and in specific sectors, they really need the time to prepare for that reporting, whether that be in terms of them getting the data that they need, getting the systems and things in order to be able to share that data and have it be shared publicly. It's super important that, the whole directive and everything that the European Commission has aimed for, it's a really high level of ambition in CSRD and ensuring quality implementation. I think it highlights that they're trying really hard to do that and trying really hard to make sure that when they do put this in place, that, for example, cutting corners or just reporting numbers that aren't high quality numbers, either A, won't be acceptable, or B, can't be the norm for organizations with this kind of directive or with this type of regulatory approach. And I think Thomas Dodd from the European Commission did a great job of emphasizing that in the last committee hearing. Heard a lot about, again, that high level of ambition that they're looking for and the results that need to come from this kind of directive. For some organizations, I'm sure it feels like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But from my opinion and from the folks that I've been speaking with, it's both a positive and a negative. I think it, again, highlights the need for direct transparency, for, again, that high level of ambition that, we certainly don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. But at the same time, there does need to be a level of rigor that is acceptable for both internal and external stakeholders for an organization to be able to make quality decisions based on the data that's going to be provided.
That makes complete sense. I don't think it's unreasonable to hear this kind of headline that CSRD has been delayed by 2 years and have the reaction that, if there's a delay, companies might take it easy or companies that feel that they can take it easy. And I don't think that's true. I think companies should absolutely be spending the next 2 years preparing for this mandate. And I think that there are two ways to look at this reaction. Policy can be a tool that pushes companies to gain readiness. And, for companies that are maybe hesitant to jump on the kind of global project of decarbonizing, a policy like this can push that to the forefront of their priorities. And then also there's the very real recognition that reporting takes intense time and resources and organization to be prepared. And there is a need to give companies an appropriate amount of time to do that. And so the question that I'd have for you is, what are your recommendations for companies that have these next 2 years? What should they be doing?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, use this time to prepare and plan strategically what are going to be, for example, your sustainability initiatives and start to understand your sustainability impact on internal, external stakeholders, on the market, and what you're ultimately going to say as an organization going forward. I think, spending the time to build an internal capacity, build internal, even start doing internal training and some of those systems that are going to be required in order to meet those requirements effectively should be top of mind. I think kind of taking an ostrich approach and kind of sticking your head in the sand and saying, okay, I've got 2 years to do, and I can just take my time and not do anything is really not going to be time well spent. But I think there's a lot you can do in order to be prepared for these requirements and in order to be prepared for other regulatory requirements that may come forward and focus really on fostering that transparency and engagement with those stakeholders, both internal and external, to show and demonstrate your commitment to, for example, some of the sustainability goals, targets, things that you might have in this period of time. And that can look so different for every organization. But, uh, and again, I think it's a key theme and something we're going to continue to go back to. But perfect should not be the enemy of good for your organization. That with this time, taking meaningful action and meaningful steps in the interim will lead to better goals or better objectives and better results overall once, for example, these requirements are solidified. Once the regulations come out and say this is exactly what you need to do, the time that you spend between now and then should be moving you towards that direction, but also allowing you to start to take action and start to look at decarbonization options for your organization. I think, going back to various, think about it as like ISO standards or other standards that exist. Continuous improvement should absolutely be at the forefront or a big thought for your organization. That where you are today, even taking small steps, evaluating where you are and looking at the sustainability practices you have in place and integrating them into, for example, some of your core business strategies, being able to say, in our supply chain, for example, that we can start to collect some of that data from our suppliers, that we can start to engage with them meaningfully because some of them may have the same regulatory requirements that you do. Start having those conversations around what they're doing and being able to facilitate that so that when these regulations and when you're required to do so, that you've already got some of those systems in place. That's absolutely meaningful action. And in that same vein, if you do have that ambition, if you do want to be a leader in the space, that continually pushing on that with these guidelines in the back of your mind, that they're, I think, building a really ambitious sustainability strategy. On the flip side of that, you still do need to remain and incorporate some of these practices in what you're doing for your sustainability program. That there are plenty of other opportunities and things you could be doing, and knowing the right things to build into your program is absolutely imperative. And unfortunately, a lot of that does need to eventually include some of the regulatory requirements that are a part of this and are going to be core to your business strategy on an ongoing basis. Making sure that you can do both of those things at the same time is imperative to be successful in the long run.
Absolutely. And I think everything that you just described, it's much more than just 2 years of work. This is people could be really diligent and improve a ton. And CSRD is not just a greenhouse gas emissions disclosure program. You really need a full a full understanding of your transition plan and your value chain engagements. It's a very holistic view of your organization. And so, right, even those little steps that you're taking will have some substantive reporting ability. And I think if we could for a second, let's, zoom out. What do you feel that this CSRD delay, do you feel that this could have an impact on sort of larger reporting requirements globally? I know this mirrors the sort of discussion that we've been having around SEC in the United States for a long time. The SEC climate disclosure rule has continued to be pushed time and time again. It makes me a little bit nervous. How are you viewing the entire system?
Yeah, I'm smirking because you brought up the elephant in the room, the SEC ruling and what's going on there. I think it does reflect a broader theme in this space that, it's not super straightforward. And something we very often say is, carbon accounting, ESG initiatives, public reporting, it's both an art and a science. That there is a lot of flexibility right now in, for example, how some of the calculations are done, how you're able to transparently speak about some of these material topics, how you're able to convey various messages to stakeholders that just make this so challenging. And that's, reflected again in so many of these organizations that have to comply with these standards. They do have high level of ambition. They are trying really hard to do the right things, and without kind of clear guidelines about what those right things are, it can make it really challenging for both parties. I think, this space is evolving so fast, and we are seeing, uh, for example, backlash against various companies and representatives based on statements that have been made. I think my biggest concern is that it should not slow down this type of action. The biggest thing for me is as long as organizations are being transparent and, what you're saying doesn't come with either ill intent, market advantage, or that you're trying to do it in a way that, um, again, has kind of that ill intent. Uh, Perfect should not be the enemy of good overall. That as long as you're being transparent with, here's how the numbers were derived. Here's how we came up with these various metrics. Here's why we determined these topics are material and what we're doing as an organization. As long as you are conveying that internally and externally, I would be hard pressed for someone to find problem with that. I think that the key for, whether it be for the regulations that are coming out or just taking action as an organization, for me, the key is that transparency. That here's, all of the rules and boundaries we put around what we did and why we did what we did. Here are the numbers. Again, being able to fully and clearly convey that messaging is key overall, whether that be for regulatory reporting or otherwise.
Absolutely. Completely agreed. And I think that is a perfect and good note to end on. Thank you, Mitch, for joining the Week in Sustainability, and to everyone that watched and listened. We'll see you next week.
Sustain.Life is the leading and most comprehensive sustainability software on the market. To learn how we can help your company measure its emissions and take climate action, go to Sustain.Life. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this show on our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.